So, yay, there's someone here. I was going to say, I'm going to wait at least for one person to come. So, hey, Michelle. Hey, sister. So I'm going to sort of hang out for a couple minutes, and I'm going to start out. I've never done this before, so I'm not sure how some of the logistics work. Like, I want to start out with a question, and then to have, hi, Mackenzie. Aw. Oh, it's kind of fun to be connecting this way. I can't wait till I see you again, both of you. Okay, so the question that I want to start with is, okay, so the topic is the 7. It's gone from 5 to 7 in the course of the day. Types of trauma and what resilience is and what it isn't. I've just seen a lot of studies out there, well, a few reference, things. It's sort of popular to reference resilience these days. And often I think it's problematic. But I'll come around to that. But that's the topic for today. And I thought we're going to start with trauma, and then, because that's really important, because all the reconnecting stuff with ancestors and the root of the problem and the fragmentation and the dissociation and the disconnection from these things that should be just available to us because they are there. It's that from where I sit, it's all trauma. Unresolved trauma. That's actually what I should say, not trauma itself. Okay, so my question is, given that this is the topic, the 7 types of trauma, as you came here, I'm guessing that you had kind of a, I don't know, a sense of that this might be of service to you. And, I have a whole unit on a course that's called What is Trauma? And I was looking over my notes and the transcript, pages. And I read it over and I was like, okay, great. But what is going to be of service today? So if you could just type in the chat, just a little bit, because I am going to function better if I'm of service to you who's here, and trusting, that will ripple out to people who are coming later. So, hey, Sherry and Catherine and Marie. Hi, Marie. She's my cousin. Sorry, I just thought of a funny joke. The first time I'm doing it, my biggest fear was that no one would show up. And so my cousins, it's like my mom and my cousin, but at least, I'm kidding. Anyway, so if you could just think for a minute about, how might this conversation be of service to you, and just type one line into the comments here, I would really appreciate it, because it would just give me a little bit of, whatever. If no one says anything, I'm ready to go. But maybe I'll think about what it could possibly be. No one? Okay, well, if something comes to you as we're talking, or as I'm talking, I guess this is me talking, then let me know, and that will be helpful to me. I will appreciate that, because what I want more than anything is to be of service right now. So I'm going to start out with more blueprints for navigating, and for making sense of it, because the cognitive piece is an important piece. I think a lot of times there's this idea that we need to get out of the mind and into the body, which we do, because we tend to, I shouldn't say we, dominant culture and those of us who've been raised up in it or influenced by it, and pretty much most everyone on earth suffers to various degrees. It's become epidemic, I guess, is what I'm saying. But the mind and the intellect and thinking is really also very important. It just needs to have its place in relation with everything else. So Okay, so the first thing, before I get into the 7 types, for the moment, I'm going to talk about 7 types of trauma. But before I talk about that, I'm going to sort of just talk about like definitions and purposes of trauma, just really basically. Oh my gosh, this is really freaky. Just saying. Okay, sorry, there's just another. Michelle says, unresolved trauma carried into initiations. Okay, so I'm just going to write this down. Blueprints for understanding how it affects, how unresolved trauma affects initiations, like birth. Okay, so I'm going to talk about trauma right now in terms of, some schools of thought that have to do with the Western tradition. So, and sort of reaching back into the Western tradition. There's other layers that have to do with traditional culture, but those are things that I'm going to talk about tangentially a little bit, not to center the West, but just also not to fetishize and rely on other cultures' wisdom, but to really look and hear. So, okay, so the Greek word for the word trauma, it's trauma, or I don't know how you say it, but it means wound. So really simply, it's a wound. And then, this is kind of like just tracing a little bit of the lineage of it. So then so that's like just a etymological kind of sense of it. But then Freud talked about, so Freud, there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding about Freud. I've worked very hard to kind of, understand Freud in his own, for what he did do instead of trashing him. There is a really real reality that during the Holocaust, he was exiled, and psychoanalysis went underground. A lot of it went to South America, and it kind of emerged again in the US under the medical model. But I think that there was a big confusion that happened there. And there's actually a thinker, so I'm like, this isn't like my notes at all, but it's okay. There's this thinker, his name is, I can't remember his first name right now, but I think it's David, anyway, Bakan. And you can look it up, and he talks about a really interesting thing about Freud, that that his sort of elucidation of the unconscious relative to the conscious, and all of what he did in terms of like connecting, going deeper than just the body and the material, that it had to do with his own, not necessarily conscious, because he wasn't a super religious Jew, but that it had to do with his own sort of ancestral knowing about Kabbalic wisdom. So it's a whole book about it, and it's quite beautiful. So I take Freud in this vein, and he does this. One of the thing that I want to talk about, Freud's vast, right? But one of the big thing he's famous for is sort of separating the conscious and the unconscious, and saying that when there's a symptom in the body, it's not just a material thing necessarily, and that when there's not like a psychological problem, that it also can be connected to the body, and that it's sort of mysterious too. But he talks about anyway, so there's this, so Freud's definition of trauma is an event that is so overwhelming that it is not translated into narrative language. And when narrative language is like story, right? So that's partly why I like the roots of the way that I name what I do at Myth Mending, is that it has to do with this story, deeply has to do with story. And so for Freud, he talks about that when an event is so overwhelming that it can't, so there's let's say conscious on this side and unconscious on this side. conscious on this side. I always mess this up. Conscious, unconscious. So that when something really overwhelming happens, it can't be processed into like a story in the like, you know, this part of the brain. So what happens is it just gets sort of submerged into the unconscious. And so the idea of analysis is you sit and you talk, and it's kind of a slow process. And the idea is that there's little like trickle overs, and that you can capture those and kind of find them and then bring the story out really slowly over years and years and years. And then Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud, this is a great, one of my favorite quotes of Jung. He says, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And so it's a similar sensibility that something, you know, this idea of the conscious is the light-filled world and the unconscious is the dark world, which is really interesting too. And that's like a whole conversation, and how that plays into things like race and value. But that's for another time. It's really interesting, not what you think conversation, because I take a kind of different twist on it. But so this is the movement. Like things get stuck in the unconscious. Hey, Leah. Things get stuck in the unconscious, and you know, according to Freud and Jung, and that. But Jung is really like, you need to delve into the dark in order to bring it forward. Whereas Freud kind of wanted to stay in the conscious and just sort of dabble. Jung really delved, and you know, had, you know, a period of years where he had a complete, you know, what might be called a psychotic break or a complete breakdown. But he traversed it to the other side. Okay, so Jung. So then, you know, and then we can sort of jump to the somatic schools, which is really where I sit, kind of. Anyway, so there's sort of like an organismic or naturalist approach, and Peter Levine, he really starts with the body, and he really was like, okay, he did a lot of traveling the world and looking at other cultures, okay, but this is sort of interesting. What he did is he didn't sort of try to promote another culture's idea of how we should do this, or imitate ceremonies, etc. But he looked to the Western mind. He's like, what can I do so that the Western mind is going to understand this? Because it needs this. So he really relies on like neurobiology and sort of a naturalist. He really looked to nature and how animals deal with trauma, etc. And so he is really interested in the body and in the organism and the wisdom of the organism. And that, and then I'm going to talk about, so those are sort of some views on trauma. Hi, Dina. And Roberta. And there's a couple people I missed up there too. But, okay, so I want to talk about William Emerson a little bit and sort of pre-perinatal psychology, because that's also an area that it has influenced me. And I'm going to talk about it more later, but just this idea of trauma as medicine, I just want to sort of seed it as trauma is not always bad. Even big trauma isn't bad. It's unresolved trauma, unsupported and unnavigated trauma. And that's what traditional cultures knew how to do. Really, I don't know, I feel like that's the biggest thing that has been lost in so many cultures, and that's perhaps why ceremony was attacked specifically. Language too, but maybe for other reasons. Anyway, with, you know, traditional cultures. So Emerson he refers to trauma as a tincture. I remember in some of my studies investigating of pre-perinatal psychology, I just remember like just sticking on that and just meditating on it for a long time. What does he mean? Because that's when I was sort of, it was probably 10 years ago now, it was like sort of a transition from thinking trauma as just being bad to being like, what would it mean if trauma was a medicine, a tincture? So that was sort of, I'm going to come around to that again. The other thing is, a purpose of trauma is to create community and culture. A lot of the way cultural agreements are perpetuated through trauma. And I'll talk a little bit more about examples of that, I think, as we go. I don't know, does anyone have any questions or comments right now? Okay, so we'll keep going, and then okay, so we're going to get into the kinds of trauma. There's one piece that I didn't really talk about that I kind of glossed over a bit that relates to, Michelle, your question or your interest. And that is Joseph Campbell. You know, everyone knows Joseph. Well, lots of people know Joseph Campbell. Not everyone on Earth, but sort of, if you're interested in psychology or anthropology, you probably heard of him. And he kind of was a universalist. He went around to the whole world and picked out things that were similar about different cultures and called them universals. Now, there's a lot of backlash against that now. Yeah, I definitely am going to come back to the whole thing about trauma as a tincture, Leah. But, okay, sorry. That's the thing about reading the comments when you're talking and you don't know where you are. But there was so there's actually a book. It's called Hero with an African Face, I think. And it's a fantastic, I haven't read the whole thing, but I read a bunch of it. And it's a fantastic book. It's written by a Black man who just kind of had his, his moment of reckoning with Joseph Campbell, because he had studied him and then came to this place where he was like, oh my God, this man was a racist. Like, how can I, and he quotes some of this, he talks about like African and their mumbo jumbo, so there's a whole piece around that, so I need to name that, because I need to not just go forward like there's like this person is unproblematic. And I want to talk about this one thing that he said. So when he was asked by one of his students or whatever, he was asked, why aren't there women in the hero's journeys, like in the hero stories from around the world? And first of all, there are women in many stories, and he would acknowledge that. But in this moment, he said that birth and maternity are where women, like, they don't need to go on big adventures. These rights, all of them, like, I mean, there'd be menarche, it'd be birth, it'd be, all the things about the relationality of being a mother, and then also menopause and eldership, and all of those things are the domain of women's heroism. So anyway, I just thought that specifically relates to what you were thinking about, Michelle. So okay, let's 5 kinds of trauma, or 7. I added a couple. We'll see how it works, or if I'm going to permanently add them or not. But okay, so the first kind of trauma, I'm just going to name them first. Okay, so there's shock trauma. There's developmental trauma. There's birth and prenatal trauma. And that's one of the ones I added, because I would have probably kept that in developmental. But there's cultural trauma. There's ancestral trauma. There's collective trauma. And there's medicinal or ceremonial trauma. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and just start talking. Yay, thank you, Leah. I really needed that. Leah says, you are doing so well, and I'm totally following you. And Christy says, right, I will never forget a Navajo elder telling me that when I fasted for years, you give birth and bleed. That is why women don't sweat and fast. Yeah. I was going to come around to this later, but in my memory, I can't remember where I received this knowledge. and I probably should, but acknowledging my ignorance is at least is important, and that I got it from somewhere. I didn't invent this idea. That the sun dance, which some of you may or may not know, but it was outlawed for a long time, and it's a profound ceremony. And someone said it's an emulation of childbirth. And you think, and also, the teaching that the Moon Lodge is an emulation of menstruation. So, my main work is with mothers, right? So this idea that our heroism and our opportunity for building this kind of resilience has to do with these areas of our lives is really, it's really, you think like, I remember being a teenager and being like, the worst thing that could ever happen to me is if someone saw that there was a tampon or a pad in my bag. That was like a total horror to think that would happen. When actually this is like my sacred birthright passage, and that bleeding is a like the sweat lodge is where we get, we have, like the temazcal is medicine. Anyway, I'm not going to get too far over that, but yeah, I don't know how that works. I think maybe someone was just asking, Angel was just saying like, oh, I left and now I can't catch up. And I think maybe you can fast forward. Anyway, she can't hear me now probably. So anyway, okay, so we're talking a little bit about, so I really think, Michelle, that how we treat our menstruation and what we understand of it and how we nourish it and how we allow it to nourish us, really, it could be has the potential to be the perfect preparation for childbirth, right? But we do this other childbirth preparation stuff instead. So, okay, 5 kinds of trauma. So, shock trauma. Oh, there, thank you. Midge is just helping Angel with getting back in. Sorry about I don't know how to close everything. But anyway, okay, so everyone, shock trauma, this is the kind that everyone knows about, right? Big thing happens, and though we think that when a big thing happens that then you're just screwed, but it really has to do with a lot of other things. It has to do with your resilience. It has to do with the context, how much support, how many layers of support you have when it happens, whether you know the path or the journey of trauma resolution, and not called that, but the equivalent in normal language. But that is the one that we think about. It's like a big event. It's like a car accident. It's like a robbery, things like rape, things like, big things. And they're and those are things are really hard, but the benefit of those is that it's really clear what the trauma is. You don't just have a problem and you have no idea why you're such an asshole or why you're such a weakling or whatever. Like I posted something earlier on my page, and it was a parenting advice, which is really great. Like, yeah, when your kid is acting bad, they just really want relationships. So instead of punishing them with, in any way, but removing your connection, that like actually being connected will help. But what if you have some sort of, see, now I'm getting totally off topic. I'm getting out of the line of my thing. But okay, what if you have a trauma in there? I guess it's related to shock trauma. What if there's a trauma in there that isn't a shock trauma, but you have no idea what it is because it's just so normal and it's so, you just think that you're a loser, right? So this is like really, especially with mothering, because there's so much expectations, there's so many problematic expectations, and there's so many things that we really want to be for our children, of course, right? But then what do you do when you just can't? And then that gets into some of these other kinds of traumas that aren't shock traumas. Because if you have a shock trauma, okay, sometimes we don't actually know with a shock trauma, you don't actually know how it is showing up in our life. That can be hard to pinpoint. You know, I think often we have pretty good ideas, even if we only tell ourselves, like, oh, the reason why I have a hard time in relationships is because the way my stepfather looked at me, or whatever, you know, like, or that I was molested, or, you know, things like that. But often we don't know. But it gets even trickier when we have something like developmental trauma, which is number 2. So developmental trauma is more like something that happens. It can still be like uncomfortable. It's not like comfortable things that happen over and over again. That's more like cultural trauma, like when you learn your manners or whatever. But I'm taking developmental trauma to be more like say like body shame for women, right? After, you know, you probably think your mother's perfect. Like, God, who doesn't think their mother is perfect? She smells perfect. Okay, I'm not talking about if there's a lot of trauma, okay. But there is a way in which when we're born, we come out of our mother's body, she is the right mama for us. Like, she really feels right and beautiful. And all other things being kind of well, if our mother sort of teaches us, even unconsciously, that she hates her body, which she probably got from her mother, then at a certain point, you know, we just give up and adopt that belief about ourselves. But it's something, the point of developmental trauma is that it's different from the shock trauma in that it happens over time, and it's not like super dramatic. It's just, it builds. Okay, sorry, I should read this out loud instead of just to myself. Rebecca is saying, I hear all the time mothers minimizing the validity of their trauma because it's not pinpointable, like shock trauma. So instead of, I struggle as a mom because XYZ, it's instead because there's something mysteriously wrong with them. And this is, I mean, I can relate to this. Like, I go there still. Like, what is wrong with me that I don't know. Like, I'm going to give you a dumb example because there are more examples that will be more exposing and make me more vulnerable because, God, they just are there. But this is a small example. And it sort of, like, my daughter, when she was really little, she used to suck her hair. And it was so, and like, oh my God, it upset me. Like, I knew that it must be connected to a trauma. So I really tried to control myself, and I talked to her about it, and I told her that I think it's really, you know, so I did my best. There's ways to, you know, handle that, but still it would, like, and I still don't necessarily know what it is. And it wasn't like top of my priorities of things to like spend $150 an hour to like heal. So, but even that kind of a thing, you just feel so out of control and like unable, like just like pathetic because you can't live up to what you know. So it's not a conscious thing. And all of these things out there in the world with like mindset and, you know, drop your story and get into this, you know, enlightened state or something. I'm like, that is just, that is just a bypass, a spiritual bypass. There's also like political bypass. That's a different kind of bypass that is starting to emerge as people get upset about spiritual bypass. Now there's this, I won't do any spiritual work because politically I'm right. So there's that. That's a, you know, anyway, just to go there. Okay, Dina says, here's one of mine. What is wrong with me because I don't have enough energy to keep up with her all the time? Which, yeah, like, or I don't want, it's not even that I can't, it's that I don't want to. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to play Lego for an hour or whatever it is. And then I feel like really shitty. And you know, there's all, you can do all this kind of like willpower stuff around that, or like thinking differently, or seeing that, well, but I do like to cuddle and maybe it's just I have my things, and fine, great. But if your daughter chewing on her hair sends you into a rage, that's a sign that there's a trauma behind there. If there's something, a way that you want to be, that you you just can't bring yourself, or you just become overtaken with a feeling. And often what happens with addiction is that before we even, like, our systems, like, are so wise and smart and able that they will send us to the whatever substance of choice, whether it's sugar or alcohol or whatever, before we even know we're upset. So addiction is also, that's a consequence of trauma. Like, I mean, just trying to quit a substance is, I never, is a good gauge of reaction versus. Yeah, I think yeah, because, okay, so Christy says it's a good gauge, a reaction versus a response. And I would say that's exactly the essence of it. Like, where you feel yourself just like, ah, then you're having that's probably connected to a trauma. And a response is like, if you can't pause, like, if it would be unbearable to pause for 5 minutes before you respond, before you do something, then that's probably a reaction, not a response. But anyway, so where was I? Does anyone know where I was? I'll probably come around to it. Okay, so that's so we've talked about developmental trauma and gone on some tangents. And really, always relating this to mothering and birth and all of the things. So the third kind is birth and prenatal trauma. So this is I have an article and it's called Trust Love. And in it, I basically say, I mean, before I had my first baby, I was told, oh, addiction, developmental trauma. Thank you, guys. Addiction. Okay, but, oh no. Okay, I'm just gonna keep going. What was I saying now then? Oh no. Okay, it's all gonna be okay. Okay, trust love. I think I kind of wrapped up the addiction. You got the idea about the addiction and developmental trauma. We're gonna move on. So thank you. Now I feel like good. Okay, so in this article, because when before I had my first child, my daughter, I thought that my body would just know what to do. My mother had me easily. That was a good sign, right? And I was with midwives, and there was this idea that I could just trust my body. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm going to get back to, so someone mark where I just was, okay? I am at the article about trust love and about my daughter, okay? So Michelle says, in thinking about children who never spend any time on the earth and instead sucked into screens all day at school and at home, would you say or think that developmental trauma occurs there due to a lack of connection to the Mother Earth? Mother, body, Earth. I mean, one could call it a developmental trauma in the way that it's like it builds over time. I think and it probably interrupts developmental. So this is another thing about developmental trauma, is that it interrupts like developmental stages. But so I might call that a cultural trauma, or honestly, there might be an argument for adding technological trauma, okay? Like that might be a category of its own, Michelle. So, but I am going to talk about it. That is a big thing. Like this is a problem. So yes, getting back to, thank you, Leah, very much, to the Trust Love article. Okay, so I thought my body would just do it. And no, my body did not just do it. I was like, I would rather die. I don't want a baby. Take it back. I argued with the fates. I bargained with the gods. I said, please, don't make me nothing. I cannot do this. I don't want something passing through my pelvis like that. Like it was going to trigger things that I did not have the support in my midwives. I did not have the support in my partner. I did not have the, you know, like, and there's sort of an interesting thing, right? Like, so I'm sort of like saying my husband sucked, right? But why did he suck? Why does anyone suck? Why do I suck? Why do I rage at my kid because she's sucking at her hair? Okay, I didn't really rage, but you know, to make the point. Not that I never rage, okay? Because it, you know, and the shame, it's like a misguided use of shame, because shame should be a resource, like something, a trigger, like, oh, so I'm off a bit. I'm feeling shame. I need to rate myself. But instead, shame, it's like we're ashamed of something that we can't even fix. Now, we just aren't. And there's a lot of big money into being sure that we don't actually heal trauma and that we continue this trajectory of fragmentation. And so that's why that's why I'm just doing this. And even though I'm terrified, oh, look at all those hearts. Yeah, hey? I'm like dripping sweat down right. I'm like nervous. I'm not so nervous anymore, but okay, anyway. Blah, blah, blah. Let me never see the transcript of this and all the ums and okays and you knows. But we're chatting, right? We're chatting. So what was my point? The point I was saying is that we feel like shit, and feeling like shit can't even help us. And so we just are stuck in this cycle of shit. So I just was like, and so eventually I did. I mean, I was pushing for 8 hours. And those of you who are, oh yes, yes. Thank you, Rebecca, for honoring that in me. Like, I'm gonna cry because Rebecca, I guess everyone can see this, right? So I don't need to read it, but maybe it helps also just to pause and be with that. Like, motherhood is so secretive, especially with rage. So I'm appreciating you appreciating me saying that, and not, because judging doesn't help anyone, right? We need to do this. We need to like heal this stuff. And that's what I want to talk about more as we go through these live streams, and, you know, but first to like get the judgment and the shame back into where it should be. And I'm just listening. Sherry's like, put a note and say, don't say So I'm saying and instead. Okay, so that birth was horrible. Like, I did get the baby out. I pushed for 8 hours. Those of you who are midwives or have given birth, you know that I mean, I was just like, I felt like this like cold in my bones, and it was like, I'm still working that trauma, and it's and unearthing what its gifts. Okay. But after that, I remember I had names. I knew that my daughter, I was going to have a girl child. Okay. And, but I thought at the very end, my husband was like, maybe just, you know, you might want to pick a boy's name just in case maybe you're wrong, Krista. And I was like, okay, out of humility, I will pick a boy's name. So I picked a boy's name. But after I had her, I was like, I will never do that again. Her name is Felix. Like, she got the boy's name and the girl's name. So I did not come out of that experience. I came out of that experience feeling horrible about myself. Like, I was a horrible woman. What's wrong with me? That my body didn't work. All of the things. I'm sure that if you're a mother, you know them, because none of us escapes. None of us gets through that just feeling great. That is a truth. Okay. And if you see someone who is acting like it was just great, they either had an epidural and they're not telling you, or they're lying to themselves, or they're lying to you because of this shame, right? So we need to start telling the truth, but not stopping there. This is part of the problem with the like tell the truth, like just tell your story, because if we just stop there, then we're just, I mean, nothing like a traumatic birth story to like actually traumatize a woman who's going to give birth. We have to be able to take this to the other side. And this is maybe one of a lot of the trauma informed everything, they can describe trauma, they can tell you the types of trauma, et cetera. So, which is what I'm doing now, but we've got to start there. But what do you do? Like, how do you heal and navigate and resolve and like have this be different? So with my second birth, that's in between my daughter and my son is when I did the somatic experiencing training. And I did work for myself as part of that. And dude, like Mama, I have been around the block because whatever trauma was triggered in that first birth, I knew that it was not like I'd never been there before or seen it. I knew, I just didn't know where it was from. I was like, where did this come from? And that's going to lead into another kind of trauma. But what was I going to say? Okay. Oh, I'm having one of those things where I'm like seeing myself freaking out and like, it's like, oh, it's all funny, but I know. I just take a moment and we can take a moment together, right? Okay, what was I was talking about, it was not a new trauma. I'd seen it before. And before I gave birth again, God damn, and I didn't get pregnant. Like my son just waited for the time and he sort of squawked in, you know. I wasn't like, okay, let's, you know, my first, I was like, let's, you know, the second one was like, oh, shit. So I knew I had to do something. It couldn't happen again like that because it was horrible, even though I had a home birth. So I did this work in between. And this is the point. The difference is I still, whatever, there's a lot of differences and that's for another time. But I came out of it feeling like, yes, I can do it. Like that, I remember the first thing I said after my son was born was like, that was not any easier. Because they tell you the second one's easier. I was like, that was not any easier. But the difference was that even though it wasn't easier, I did it. And this is what it feels like to traverse trauma. Like, come on, giving birth, that is trauma. Oh, my computer isn't plugged in. I better plug that in. Yeah. So, hey, Kat. Okay, so this is kind of like, okay, so birth trauma. This was, for me, being with midwives and giving birth and just completely not being understood, not being given any sense that it might not be just this beautiful, ecstatic, orgasmic thing was traumatic for me, okay? So and it took me years to recover. And so that was a home birth, okay? So you can't decide for someone whether their birth was traumatic or not. Some women have a cesarean birth, some babies go through cesarean birth, some babies go through natural birth and afterwards they didn't quite, you know, and they're working it out for weeks afterwards. But, so we can't decide for anyone else. This is a really, really important piece about respect and not deciding for other people when they have trauma and when they don't have trauma. And I can't emphasize that more. It's just not respectful and we need to have respect. So we talked about birth and prenatal, like, you know, in the womb, we don't know if someone's traumatized and what traumatizes people, but I would put this in the realm probably of technological birth or technological trauma as well. So this article that I wrote called Trust, Love, one of the points I make is that I will never again judge a woman for making the wise choice to get an epidural because somewhere in her, she knows that giving birth is going to trigger a trauma. This makes me cry. Is going to trigger a trauma that she does not have the support to navigate. It doesn't mean that we are like, yay, cesarean birth. But it gives us a way into compassion for the mother. Instead of being in these camps, natural birth, unnatural birth, you know. We can look at technology. That's different than looking at a mother. And we need to be careful when we, you know, make these distinctions. Not because we're going to avoid offending anyone, because we live into this, you know, offense culture where we can't ever offend anyone, but you better not offend someone that you're not ready to hold through what you trigger. That's what we're missing. But we don't know anymore how to hold. And we don't have no, none of us have what we need. So this is what my mission is, to you know, and how I work with women and mothers, etc. Oh, hey, Serena. Oh my gosh, Serena, hi. All these people that I haven't seen for a minute while I disappeared into academia. Okay, so, it's 45 minutes, right? So we're going to get to the 5 kinds of trauma. Okay, where is cultural trauma? Okay, so this has to do with like, just kind of like domestication, you know, like that is culture. Like we have, and this sort of leads into some of the medicinal ceremonial, and I kind of almost put them together, but like, I don't know, like one example that I saw in my notes is like about like respecting your elders, right? Some people think this is, I mean, in dominant kind of Western culture, this is considered ridiculous, right? Like, elders are throwaways. But in most, dare I say all, and be an offensive universalist, like you can measure if a culture is traditional, if it values its elders in a real way. Okay, so, you know, just reading something. Okay. But in order to like respect your elders, you've kind of got to remind the child that they're small and the elders are big. Like there's a way of, okay, I'm gonna look at that in a second, Leah. And so there's a way in which Martin Prechtel has an interesting thinker on this. Like he talks about like our domestication as kind of a bad thing. There's also like a certain point where it's just what we do, and this sort of ties into trauma as medicine, you know, and that there's a spiritual teacher who gives a teaching that I kind of carry with me, and he says, accustom your children to hardship. I mean, and with this idea, when we look in a few minutes about resilience and how resilience is actually built and create, you know, in the system, you can sort of see. So we kind of have to have little traumas to, you know, like letting your kid freaking struggle for a while to put their coat on. Like, my God, like, right? No, I'm being ranty. Okay, wait. It's really like giving your children the opportunity to struggle and get through it is important. And this is also has to do with cultural, you know, there are traumas that we can do to our children that are about helping them to participate in our culture. And in the moment, they might feel like it makes them small, but that there's a way in which there's a balance between belonging and trauma. And if you do it right, you can, like, we're not wild. If we have culture, we're not wild. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, there's, you know, like wild in the sense of like, I think we're a little over domesticated, a little. The global dominant narrative is that we ought to be very domesticated, and that's too much. Okay, but if you think of, like, if you go back and you think about a traditional culture and how we're going to, like, there's rules. Like my kids, you know, it's sort of a Mexican thing. Like when someone comes into the room, you welcome every person in the room. You don't, okay, hold on. I want to not have this. I don't even know if I can scroll. Oh, I can. Okay, so I don't ever miss anything. Okay, would relationship trauma be considered a cultural trauma? I wonder what you mean. Can you say a little bit more about relationship trauma in a thing, and then I'll come back to that because I'm not, just say a little bit more about that to give me a bit more context. And then Rebecca is saying, my discomfort with children's discomfort, I've always felt it as cultural trauma. Yeah, like not letting people just have their feelings. Like this is a big, okay, this is a cultural trauma. Okay, so there's some good cultural traumas, like manners, maybe. I don't know about manners, but okay, abusive relationship. Okay, hold on a second. Hi, Rona and Christine and Lori. Well, I'm definitely going to do this more often because look, I get to hang out with all these amazing women who I haven't, like Rona and Christine. I went to high school with Rona and Christine, okay? Oh my God. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay, so I'm in like 3 different places. I can do it. I can pull it together. Cultural trauma. This, I want to talk about what Rebecca's saying here, because cultural trauma around not letting people have their feelings because they make us so uncomfortable, like to see your kid crying to get their coat on, and then just putting it on for them because it's just so uncomfortable to, like, you just never want your kid to have pain. This is a struggle. Like that is not, that's a problem. So that now we'll hand someone a tissue, and that's basically like short for shut up, you know, get it together. And it's almost like, even if you don't have that intention, if you hand someone a trauma, a tissue, like no matter how kind someone is, if someone hands me a tissue, I feel shut up, just because that's what that gesture, it's like it's a cultural understanding. At least in Canada, maybe that's just in Canada. Okay, so I want to get back, now I want to talk about Leah. Would an abusive relationship be considered cultural trauma? Insofar as we allow it. Okay, this is really complicated, okay? And maybe I'm gonna just touch on why it's complicated. And, oh God. Maybe I shouldn't go there right now, but okay, so you think about, we're gonna talk in a minute about trauma being medicinal or ceremonial, and often that is considered abuse. People decide that that's abuse. And but I think that you're asking about if you're in an abusive relationship, like, are you talking about domestic violence? I'm going to assume you're talking about Kristen, I love it. She's like, I never knew that about tissues. I just keep going. Good for you. Good for you. For me, it's a practice. I have to work to keep going a little bit. I have to be like, no, it's such a cue for me. But okay, so an abuse, I'm thinking we're talking about domestic violence. So yes, just the simple answer is, it's being in an abusive relationship I think it's a shock. I think that's a shock trauma, if it's like violence. But it can also, when it happens over and over, it can be developmental. Insofar as we don't just develop until we're 25 or something. We develop it for our whole life. And so it can start to affect whether we're developing into the next, phases of life. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. So yeah, and it's a cultural trauma, yes, insofar as there is agreement to some degree that even if in this culture, like in America where I live, and that's the culture that I'm under, whether that's my culture of heart or my culture of, I'm influenced by it and I'm affected by it. I can't look at the chat because then I forget where I am. But in this culture, even though we kind of agree that violence isn't okay, there is agreement that violence against women is okay, or at least the things that lead up to overt acts of violence against women. And then it's interesting because you can accept those things, but then still say you don't agree with violence against women, but you're supporting all the things that converge to almost ensure that there is violence against women. It's a very tricky, it's tricky. So Christine says, being told I was too young to be stressed out. I know, and it's something I have to, Christine's saying, when I was a teen, I was told that I was too young to be stressed out and my feelings were not validated. And sometimes I think that about my daughter. I'm like, oh my God, you have no freaking idea. Like, I have to like make sure we eat and, you know, like, but, you know, the fact is that where she's at and where it's appropriate for her to be at, oh, perfect. She's doing perfectly. And of course, and this is her chance to deal with stress, right? So instead of shaming, like, well, I'm not going to say shaming because shame is, I'm going to hold the possibility that shame is useful if we can understand it correctly or in a particular way, not correctly. Instead of that, we can, like, what's the smallest thing that we can do to help to, like, or even just, oh, you know, you're stressed. Okay. You don't need to fix it, because fixing it also, then that will lessen resilience. Okay, I got to move on. No more questions. Okay, so ancestral. So this is something that's sort of gotten popular later. And this is the thing that in my body, when I was having my first child, that I realized was ancestral or intergenerational. I probably would actually separate intergenerational and ancestral, maybe not. Okay, so intergenerational or ancestral trauma. So, you know, this has become very popular. No one talked about it. I will turn 50 this year. And when I was young, no one talked about it. I was just, I just thought I was crazy. I just thought I was crazy. So one of the things that they've done is that they can, you know, it's like, they can diagnose PTSD in the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, even though they would say their lives are pretty good, and they might not even say they think they have PTSD because it's so normalized. But you know, all of the markers for PTSD are they find them. Now, I'm not into diagnosis and all that, but it is kind of an interesting, you know, it shows that. So I mean, this is kind of out there now, that we carry things just from past generations. How this exactly is transmitted, they don't know. Now, I don't know if it matters, and I think that there are probably lots of wise and connected people on this earth who do know. Science, whatever, doesn't know. Okay, so then there's collective trauma. Now, epigenetics, exactly. So then there's collective trauma, which has to do with this one is more like it's ancestral, but it's not you. And this is not, okay, this is really, we need to be careful with this, because I'm not talking about past lives where you used to be Lakota and that's why you like the Sundowns now. Like, I'm not talking about that. I just want to be really clear. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, and it really has to do, I mean, okay, maybe I'll talk about it in this way. There's a scholar, I guess. His name is Peter Breggin. Like 20 or 30 years ago, I read this book. It's called, I don't even know if I can remember what it's called. Toxic Psychiatry, maybe? If you're interested, I can ask me and I'll look it up. But he says that mental illness is the result of, he calls it psychospiritual overload. And there's certain people, and they're the people who would be like, he says, these are the people who would be recognized in a traditional culture as healers, okay? And I say healers like a, yeah, okay, let's just say healers. Okay, so, and that that is no longer valued, it's not recognized, it's just doesn't, there's no, those people are just throwaways basically. And he's basically saying that they, and I relate it to ancestral trauma because there's a way in which like I don't know exactly how this works, okay, but right now this is where I'm at with it. That in collective trauma, like that there's that some people maybe, or at some times in our life, or in certain rites of passage, we have access to more than just our personal lineage. But we have access and are called to heal more than our lineage. And that this is not a right, it's an obligation. It's not even, I mean, it's a burden, okay? and that basically, you know, there's something that went around on Facebook a few years ago, and maybe it still circulates, and it was a Malidoma Somé, and how he's just saying that if these people were just initiated into, I'm going to say the word shamanic, but I don't like using that word because it's all kinds of abused, but I'm going to say it with that caveat that I know that it's abused, and I'm using it to oh God, I just hate using it. But in a okay, so that they're initiated into the way of the healer, and that does have the capacity to drop into this collective unconscious, as Jung would call it, and work in that domain. So again, this is not like the past life thing, and probably because of the abuse of the past life thing of like I was a whatever. Is why I have chosen not to believe in past lives. But I think I'll be okay. Okay, so then the last one that I have is medicinal or ceremonial. And this is the one that I really want to, that is, you know, kind of, Mackenzie found it, yes, toxic psychiatry. Why therapy, empathy, and love must replace the drugs, electroshock, and biochemicals. Yes, that is it. Chris Mackenzie. Really great, you know, work standing up to all of this. But now we have, I mean, I think like 1 in 5 people is taking drugs, and I'm not. If you're taking drugs, I am not on you about this. I've taken drugs because, you know, like antidepressants, because it's like I have to survive, and there is no. Most of the therapy and the stuff out there is not actually helping anyone. So you're kind of, that's, you know, so, but as a place, this is what we're doing. We're medicating ourselves. Okay. So medicinal ceremonial, this has to do with, there's a quote I have in my notes. I'm going to read it. It's from Martin Prechtel. If I can find it. So it's after that. He talks about it as a disaster. Like he talks about ceremony. It's so beautiful. He talks about ceremony as a, I kind of talk about it as a, I can't find it, as a, if you want to know the exact quote, tell me and I'll give it to you. But I call it intentional trauma, because the real ceremonies that I've been to that are like at least somewhat culturally intact, it's not like this like just following a protocol and then you have a ceremony. It's this like really profound, energetic holding of an intentional trauma that then creates an opening. Like even if you just, I don't know, like the sweat house is a version. Okay, I've done I've done sweats in my life, and every time I get to this place where I think I might die, And to me, this is the exact thing. It's like, if I don't get to that place, and I almost don't like doing sweats, and because it's a real ceremony, the ones that I've been in. I want to read this comment in just a second. Because if you just feel great and it's a nice, I'm not saying it has to be horrible, and it never is. But the thing is that in those ceremonies where I get to a place where I feel like I'm going to die, and I have to turn to something, not just in myself, but also in the people around me. And I have to give, because I also have to support the people around me who are in the circle, and I have to sing. And as long as I sing, you find a way through. Like, I've actually never asked to leave a sweat. Though every time I think I really might die, and it's like this claustrophobic kind of. So my point is that it's like this. It's like, but then I do it, and it's like I got through that, and I feel it's like I can traverse things. I am resilient. Okay, so hold on. There's this thing. I also feel collective trauma. Oh, this is Shochik. I also feel collective trauma is also like when you're a member of a particular group and you see your community constantly being oppressed or targets of violence. Even if personally you aren't experiencing, you see others similar to you being hurt over and over. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's very real. Okay, so Josie says something. I don't know when you said that. The ceremonial trauma thing, you're going to die, then moving to, yes. And that's, and if you, and this, this is the thing, right? About appropriation and about like the sweat, for example. People want to just do a sweat lodge and like have this thing, right? But really, that form is a particular form. If you're not, like trauma, we need trauma. I guess that's the bottom line. We need trauma. So ceremony, like if you're doing ceremony, is really hard. You might die, and so that's it. And it does. It relates right back to childbirth, and that's this incredible thing about it. Okay, so that's all of the. I don't know if I covered that last one very well, but it's like already 6:08, and I think the protocol for Facebook Lives, you have to end within an hour, right? That's the rule. Okay, but so just quickly, some of the consequences of trauma. The biggest thing for me is the loss of being able to be in the present moment. So fragmentation, dissociation, because it's not safe to be in your body. It's not safe for you to use that part of your body. Like, that, do you ever do that thing where you're just like, kind of like, you have like a weird habit where you like brace yourself on one side because there's a trauma in your body that, your body is holding there. And that's like how trauma operates in the body. That's a different day. But lots of spiritual connection, you need to be present in your body and in the world to like actually like apprehend the layers of support that are there, like the earth and the ancestors and the everything, right? And so that's the spiritual connection. Physiological shutdown. So a lot of chronic illness has to do with traumas that aren't processed. It's like this culture, the American dominant Western mind, and it's seeped into everything. Like I'm not saying that it relies on perpetuating this. So when I think about social justice or like fighting this or that, this is how I do it, and this is how I want to be in community with people who are finding ways together to do this. And this is my piece that I have to offer. So The last one is the loss of resilience, okay? Or the consequence of trauma is resilience I have. Like unless it's unintegrated or unnegotiated, and this should be what ceremony does, okay? But we don't have that. Most people don't have access to that right now, but this is what I'm working in, is how do we access that without being appropriative? Because appropriating, it's not just that it's hurtful, it is hurtful, but it's also just not gonna help you. So but I get why people do it. I have compassion because because what else, what is there, right? I'm saying that there's something exists, there is something. And I know that. So trauma causes breaks in physiology and consciousness when the nervous system isn't allowed to complete its responsive plan of action. So this gets deeper into like more theory about how it works, that the trauma, and then how we can start navigating it instead of not navigating it. Okay, I want to read this. This is Chana. I've felt so lost my whole life and longing for connection to my culture. I never felt I fit in anywhere and felt overwhelmed by much of the way life is lived today. I had an inner knowing of things never taught to me about my heritage, etc., and felt a whole ancestral trauma and these other traumas you're speaking of, and it makes so much sense to me. How dissociated the society is from earth and woman as life givers and sacred, our lack of community, lack of self-worth through the insane fast-paced life and automated everything. My DNA knows how we live today is wrong, and I physically hurt trying to keep up. Yes. Yes. So would you say undisturbed autonomous birth or birth in general could be a medicinal ceremony? Yes, it is the ceremony. I'm sorry. Sorry to you because I'm thinking you're going to get this, but like it is, and then I see that she's reciting to Shochi. Okay, sorry, that's the wrong thing. Okay, undisturbed, yeah, birth, like I think, I don't know how to say your name, Zinkala. I don't know if you're on here still or not, but, and I don't want to like, we've talked, like undisturbed, unassisted birth, that this is what, okay, with the caveat that I understand, I mean, I don't, okay. I don't think that it's a good way to rage at my children. But that also doesn't mean that I hate ragers, okay? Because I understand, and I know that hating anyone doesn't help anything. So when I say that unassisted birth, I think birth belongs to mothers and sisters and families, not the medical establishment, okay? But that doesn't mean that I think anyone should have done anything other than what they did. It's a paradox, okay? And it will just stay a paradox. And I have to, it's like, it's kind of like, it's kind of like for me, it's like an indigenous ontology that is about honoring duality. There's hot and cold, there's male and female, there's light and dark, and there's day and night, and there's like everything. And this is like, this is why it's called lēmniscāta. Lēmniscāta is like this, and this is Latin. And I'm offering this as a touchstone because it's like one of my teachers, her name is Francesca Mason Boring. She says, it doesn't matter who you are. If you go back far enough, we all came from the tent. But we have a lot of work. Some of us have more work than others to get back with integrity. And hopping on other cultures is just not, it's just not going to get anyone there. So there is a way to, that's another topic. Okay, so yeah, I say birth is, I say the female body is an original instruction, and that's a teaching that I received, and this is part of the Temazcal teaching, and this is part of, you know, the many teachings that I've received, and that the female body has wisdom, and that it's like, I mean, you know, the idea that the sweat lodge is an emulation of the moon lodge, of menstruating, that the sun dance is an emulation of childbirth. These are gifts from women. Men have their own gifts, okay? So by saying that this is a gift of women, it's not to say that other beings and other ways don't also have their gifts, okay? And so I love that question, and I'm dwelling on it a lot, and it sort of also harkens back to Michelle's question, and also not question, but inquiry, and it also comes back to my purpose in the world. Okay, so last I want to talk about resilience. So one of the things that resilience is, okay, so this is the dictionary definition, okay? It's the power or ability to return to the original form, position, etc., after being bent, compressed, or stretched. So it's elasticity. It's the ability to recover readily from illness, depression, adversity, or the like, buoyancy. And so this is why the spiritual teacher Abdul Baha, he says, accustom your children to hardship. This is why Emerson says trauma is as a tincture. This is why all kinds of things, all kinds of ceremonies have these traumas. I was going to say circumcision, because that is one of those things that is done all around the world. But I don't want to get in there because I'm like, oh, I'm going to get hated. And I just remember I asked my somatic experiencing instructor, because I was just trying to understand like this difference, right? I said, so you saying that a circumcision could happen, and if it's held well, that it could be resilience building? Like if the women are singing and the men are singing, and the drums and the bells and the, you know, all of the things that are needed, and the consciousness is there, and the container is held, and all of the things, that this could be resilience building, not damaging. And she was a doula, and she took a moment, and she said, yes, that's the theory. And that got me thinking for a long time. And I mean, you know, like a lot of the ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, were outlawed because they were considered like unethical, like horrible. And this is just a different way of looking at it. And it's my part of how I grapple with what has been villainized, and to try to think about, well, maybe it's not horrible. Maybe this is just the colonial overlay of like how we're thinking about it. So that's one of the ways I thought about it. Okay, so here's the way that human beings acquire resilience. That for now, there might be other ways that this isn't the end of it all. But so inheritance, ancestral lineage is passed, resilience is passed down, probably through all kinds of ways. But so imprints, like shock, and like any kind of trauma that you have and that's unnavigated, that will happen. If it's navigated well, then shock and developmental trauma can actually create resilience. But also, I'm feeling like I need to wrap up here. Okay, created resilience. William Emerson, he actually said, when someone said, if I had the chance to adopt a perfect baby or a traumatized baby, I would choose to adopt the traumatized baby because it has more potential. So I mean, I have dwelt on that for years and years and years, and and thought about what that means. And it's a huge, big thing. Other conversation, but the idea, but there's sort of like, You know that feeling? I don't know. I'm thinking there's something that Shochi said earlier about, when you see your whole culture being, oppressed, and you, even if you're not experiencing that particular one, it affects you still because you look like those people. When you go to a thing and like everyone's like measuring like where they are on the attachment scale or like the trauma scale, like how traumatized are you, and because you're in like the therapy type will be understand this, and like everyone's like, I'm really resilient, like everyone, and then you're like, I'm always the big horrible loser, like I'm the one that gets global high and activation, like I'm the one that like is just super traumatized, horrible attachment, all of these things, right? But after a while, I was like, you know what? Those people who just think that they're so perfect, they're either lying or they're really not very resilient. They have no compassion. And the fact that I've had trauma and I've had to work through so much gives me the ability to understand things. So actually this sort of like earned resilience as opposed to inherited resilience, and it sort of has to do also with fragility. Like part of why fragility exists, whether it's white fragility or male fragility or any kind of fragility, economic fragility, whatever, it's because our systems haven't been challenged in that way, and so we just can't even register it. So I really want everyone to understand that there are these different kinds of trauma, and we're doing this so that we can use and have integrity with our obligation, because we were given these traumas, and birth is our first trauma. Exactly. It is, it's traumatic. And this is one of the things I say when it comes to circumcision. Like, I didn't circumcise my son because I'm too weak, okay? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not gonna say it's right or wrong, but I'm gonna say that at least think about that birth is kind of traumatic. Certainly was for, the question is, did you traverse it or not? Did you come through with support and holding? And same thing with circumcision or whatever. Okay, so yeah, I think that's okay. So the last thing I want to say about what resilience isn't, and that's I guess the piece that I wanted to say. Like, I read this paper in part of my academia crap stuff, and it was talking about like, it was like, so and so people are more resilient than these other fucked up people. Sorry for swearing. I have to swear sometimes. Anyway, okay. And it was like, and they was trying to measure, I can't remember the exact thing, but basically the upshot was, see, this group is successful. They finished college. They blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, to me, that does not mean you're resilient if you're able to finish college. Resilient means you're able to talk to plants and listen and hear them. And you're able to like evolve. You're able to like give. You're able to, it is not about being able to finish college and make a good living, okay? That is not resilience. And I was shocked that this was like, it was a contemporary within the world of like social justice scholarship measures of resilience. And anyway, so that is a whole nother conversation. I just want to check what Mackenzie said. This is really connecting the dots for me, being raised Mormon and some things that go into the church and their regard for being the last inhabitants of the earth in their teachings, being of the pioneer stock too. Interesting, with so many children in that church surviving ritual abuse disguised as ritual. Interesting. I'd love to talk to you more about that, Mackenzie. Since Sky is saying, interesting discussion of birth done in a good way as medicinal and trauma as building resilience if managed well. I was told by an elder once that our birth is our first trauma. Yeah. And as Chana was saying earlier, or asking, but really when you ask the question that's a humble way of suggesting something that might be possible, really, right? Just by offering a question, you're opening space for something that might be possible. So, so as she pointed out, that this is a archetypal ceremony, and when our cord is cut, that physical connection to our mother is cut. Yeah, that's a trauma, but it's like, and Sky too. I you know, like, it's such an interesting conversation, getting into like some particulars too about you know cultural traditions and stuff. But I don't want to do that here. I like a lot of the, I want to, the thing about yeah, there's a whole piece that I want to talk about. Maybe that's going to be the next one, because it keeps coming up and I'm like, not now. So like this piece, so I'll give you a little teaser, something about about like appropriation and how to kind of get a little bit of freedom around that without being icky, and I've been working on this for a while, and I have some thoughts about that. So about how we might, and I actually, if you scroll down, there's a thing, and I sort of give a piece about it. But there's a little bit more to it than that. So maybe that will be the next one, who knows? But hey, Jessica, I guess, I don't know if when it says people join, if they then start at the beginning, and so then they're, so then I'm saying, hi, Jessica, and she'll hear that at the end. I don't know. I don't know how this works exactly. But, okay, so is there anything else that anyone wants to ask? Or I think that maybe there's going to be, these comments will be here, and we could continue, like if there's, or maybe we could go back to the other post where there's list of topics. And I was thinking I might even go and rearrange them a bit, or just keep building them. And I'm thinking I'm going to do this on Wednesdays, not Thursdays. I actually thought this was Wednesday for weird parts of the day, but it's Thursday. But anyway, but the good day for me is going to be Wednesdays at 5 to do this, at least for a little while. Just reading some of these. Yeah, so what is the proper way to end these things? I am going to tell you that I would love to talk to any of you more about any of this. Private message me, friend me, tell me that you were here. And I have, if you want to sort of delve a little bit more deeply, a little bit more into this, you can go, I have a website. It's really easy because it's christaarias.com. Oh my gosh, that sounds so funny. Yeah, christaarias.com. But anyway, it's where my art is there and all the stuff that I do there, but especially my work with mothers. And there's like a little freebie thing that that's called Soft Animal. And it's an exercise. It's kind of one of the sort of beginning exercises in the process that I use for doing the thing, like the healing of the trauma, the navigating of the trauma that didn't get ceremony, that didn't get holding, that didn't get what it needed to get. And that is like a really good place to start if you want to kind of go a little bit further. And you go to my website and you just go to the Start Here button. And there's other ones. That's the first one. You can get them all or get one or whatever. And then I will keep you. Then you'll hear from me more. Okay, so yes, I feel the same way, Chana. Like I thought this was going to be really horrible. So she says, feeling so blessed to be here in the presence of all the women here. Thank you for holding space for us to gather today, Krista. And I just want to second, third, fourth, fifth that like I thought this was going to be horrible. I thought I was literally going to poop my pants out of, like I was nervous. I'm introverted and like I feel exposed and like what if I say the wrong thing or but what my experience is like, oh my gosh, these women, look at all these women here. And so I'm actually kind of looking forward to next week. And so mwah, mwah, mwah. talk to you all soon, and I'm going to figure out how to end this. How do I send hearts? Can I do that? Oh, here. I'm going to send some hearts, and then I'm going to go. Oh my gosh, it's going so slow. Okay, I'm just going to go hearts. Oh, there it is. Hearts, hearts, hearts. Oh, mine didn't do the thing. Okay. Mwah.